Hello, welcome to this podcast. We're covering natural law and consciousness. In this episode, we'll be looking at hypercube symbolism and octagon symbolism. Now, we're said to be living in a three-dimensional reality. The hypercube is a cube within a cube, and it relates to the fourth dimension. Now, this is a simplistic explanation of dimensions, or as they're known in the occult world, the mystical world, as densities. They're telling people through the symbolism of the tesseract, the hypercube, of what the dark occultists think of the world, the place that they have in it. We're said to be living in the third density, or three-dimensional realm. And this is the realm of a cube, within a cube, as it relates to the fourth dimension. So we're in the third dimension, operating within the fourth dimension. Now, allow me to explain dimensions. Zero dimension is a point or a singularity, meaning it is no space. Nothing, just a point or a location within space. It's a coordinate system, but it's not considered dimensions because it has no length, width, or depth. It is just a point. That is zero dimension. Now, if we extrude that point through space, that creates a vector, meaning now we have a dimension. It has an axis, a coordinate system, and we're in one dimension because we can measure its length, the length of the line. Now, if you take that line and you extrude it into another plane, we arrive at the second dimension, which is a plane. Now it has two dimensions, length and width. If we continue this into the next dimension up, we take a plane and we extrude it into the third dimension, we get a cube. That next dimension in space, the third dimension, is a square. As we can see, we can represent it as a cube, three-dimensional object. Now, this is where it gets a little bit tricky because our ability to visualize the fourth dimension is hard when we're living in the third dimension. But we can do it. So we need to explain the fourth dimension in a more abstract or mathematical way. Technically, a hypercube is a cube that's been extruded through the next dimension, the fourth dimension. If you look at a cube and move it along one direction along a straight line, and you took that entire substance of the cube and moved it through dimensional space, you pulled it into a higher dimension. The image that you get is a four-dimensional image. That is, and we can view this as a two-dimensional projection of a hypercube. If you look at it in a three-dimensional way, imagine a 3D object that you're seeing. It looks like just a cube. But now imagine it has been pulled to the left, so you have another cube just above it. And that's what we call a hypercube. It's an extension or extrusion of a three-dimensional body into fourth-dimensional space. We are visually representing this in two dimensions. A hypercube is a cube that has been rotated through another dimension of space. The object continuously expands and collapses in on itself to a form that could be considered a vortex or a rotating self-contained box. In the occult, this is considered to be a representation of the universe. The hypercube epitomizes the worldview of the dark occultists. It is a way that they see themselves, in relation to the world. And once again, Hypercube symbolism is the most occulted information. This information is only released to the high-level occultists in the dark occult. Now, if we look at this in circular terms, instead of straight lines but smooth arcs, it would look like a toroidal tube that continually extends and collapses in on itself. It rotates in itself. Now, we're just crudely representing these with lines. The hypercube is a four-dimensional representation of a continually rotating box. Now, what does this mean in occult terms? What I've shown here is a two-dimensional projection. Basically looks like a pyramid with its capstone missing or cut off. If we take each one of the 6 sides of that cube to be a pyramid with a square base, we will see that all the apexes of the pyramid have been cut off or are missing, and there is a small cube in the middle. The pyramids with the capstone cut off converge to form one solid cube in the middle. The hypercube is a symbol of the dark occult, and it represents mind control, and it is heavily used in every aspect of society. They're trying to shut down human consciousness and keep it in a limited state. Currently, the dark occultists see this world, this reality, as a prison. They see the universe as a never-ending prison for the spirit, for the soul. It's not true. In other words, they see this place as a prison because it is governed by natural laws, by higher laws that they can't control. Now, dark occultists want to be God in this world. They do not want any laws governing their conduct. They want to do whatever they want, with no repercussions in the form of higher law. In other words, they wish to be creators of the universe, or quite simply, they want to be God. Now, they do have an integral view that everything is one, but they just don't want to live within that paradigm. Everything is governed by higher laws, and those laws are in place for our evolutionary growth and development. These laws are the highest vision of ourselves and the world that we want to live in at any given point in time. Now, provided that we simply continue to observe the parameters, respect the boundaries of natural law, we are bound by these higher laws, whether we want to be or not. But dark occultists, they have methods for subtly subverting this and doing their ends around it. They get other people to do the things that they want done. They never get their hands dirty. They never do it themselves. They think they can get away with breaking natural law by getting other people, their minions, to break it on their behalf. So these dark occultists get around the karmic consequences of their actions by getting other people who are too stupid to see what is being asked of them to perform immoral actions on their behalf. These people are unread and they're delusional. They do not understand natural law, and they don't follow these laws. They think they are outside the bounds of natural law. These people think they have the right to do what they do. They think they have the right to hurt others, but what they are really doing is hurting themselves. And they will never understand this. They will never understand that other people have rights, and they have no right to interfere with the moral boundaries of others. The dark occult worldview, as it relates to the symbolism of the hypercube, They see it as a prison for the mind. The hypercube is a symbol of this prison because it can be viewed as a pyramid with the capstone missing. Dark occult is built with stone, physical matter, and their symbol of the pyramid is made of stone. They're the dark creators of reality. The stone that they reject is natural law. It is the triangle at the top with the eye in the middle of it, with the light radiating out from within. The inner cube represents the mind control, the prison. The mind is held in a prison and is continually fed with erroneous beliefs. Erroneous beliefs become like a drug to some people, like a slow drip poison. The outer cube represents the physical universe, and hence base matter, because it forms the base of the pyramid, which they consider not to be part of them. That we're not one. We're not part of the whole. There are physical and spiritual rules that govern us, but they think that these rules do not apply to them. They consider everything as separate from everything else. The military and police hold the view that they are separate from other people. This view is that everyone is separate. We are all separate from the earth and from the universe. They know there is a spiritual dimension that underlies everything, but they reject it, and hence the rejection of the capstone. The builders ultimately reject reality, and the spiritual and physical worlds are intertwined. So this idea that everything in the physical world is separate is a product of diseased, faulty thinking, a corrupted mind. Now, people in religion often think this way. They think that God exists outside of themselves, that we're simply living in this other reality, separated from God. This is diseased thinking. It is duality thinking, and it's only going to lead to more suffering. The dark occultists view everything as separate, and in addition to that, they view the physical world as inferior to the spiritual world, the spiritual dimension, when in fact these things are all one and the same. Everything is spiritual. Everything is in fact one thing, experiencing itself. We need to get out of this dualistic thinking and into a view of the law of one, that we're all connected. We need to get out of the us versus them paradigm that is derived from thinking that everything in the universe is separate from everything else, when in fact they are all entwined, entangled, inextricably bound to each other and affecting each other. As a result of this poisonous worldview that dark occultists have, they see the entire universe as a prison. And that is the outer cube of the hypercube, of base matter imprisoning the soul and spirit. And in their rage about this, because they do not want to be bound by natural law, they look at it as this prison, as not something that is there for their betterment, for their evolutionary development, but a realm of hell. The view of the dark occultists is that I am eternally trapped here, and because I loathe and detest this situation, I am going to take the approach that it is better to reign in hell than to rule in heaven, than to serve heaven. Therefore, I'm going to become a lord and master of this prison and put everyone else in a deeper level of mind control that even I am at. Then I will become their owners and rulers, and ultimately their God. This is the erroneous belief system of the dark occult, that they can be gods on earth and rule others. These dark occultists are really miserable people. They are miserable all of the time, and their life's goal is to make other people feel as miserable and as horrific as they do. And I tell you, they're doing a great job of it. That is because the morons among the human population are too happy to help them do it. Because ultimately they have no self-respect. They should become adult about this situation and employ some free will in relation to this situation to break free of that mental prison that they hold themselves in. Now, the inner cube represents this mind prison that the dark occultists want to create, the world of mind control. They are putting people in a smaller box than even they are in. That is the only way that they can control people. They understand the higher nature of reality that we're living in, and they loathe and despise it, and therefore they want to keep other people's consciousness as low and as suppressed as possible, in an even smaller box than they are in, so that they can be controlled. Hence, the box within a box. The cube within a cube. The hypercube can be viewed in 2 dimensions. As such, it is viewed as an octagon. To understand this, imagine an outline in the shape that forms an octagon. The octagon is one way to think of the dark occultists and how they employ the symbolic concept of the hypercube and their usage of this symbolism. They're not going to represent it as an easy way for you to see it. Now, to view this, you can imagine it's of a cube inside a cube, sort of on its side, with the lines connecting the corners of the cube. People would immediately recognize that as a hypercube, but they want to be a little bit more subtle. If you saw the image of a hypercube everywhere, but you take away most of the lines and look at it from a 2-dimensional view, then what you'll see would be an octagon. It is viewed as 2 boxes which are often depicted as being one right on top of another, turned at 45 degrees to each other. This is a 2-dimensional representation of a 4-dimensional object. Of reality's dimensions intertwine, the third intersecting with the fourth. This is where a lot of dark occultists would say they are connected to, the 4th dimension. This is where they derive a lot of their power from. I would say that they are being controlled from these higher dimensions. Now, do you think that anyone that is human could possibly be at the top of this hierarchy? This hierarchy of control, of mind control that's going on? These people are puppets themselves. It doesn't matter how high you go into that hierarchy in a human form, there is always something beyond it. It goes right up into the realms of principalities and higher dimensions. It comes to a point when it is all based on the same force. You have to be fearful, as fearful as a puppet, and it doesn't matter who is controlling it at the highest level. The game is always played through fear. Fear is the method to get into mind control. They control through fear. Ultimately, all these controllers, no matter at what level of the system they operate, are all fearful little children in their actual psychological and spiritual makeup. The people in control of this planet, now, they want to be called God in a world that they have turned into hell. They would rather this than live in harmony with natural law and cooperating with God. They would rather reign in hell than serve in heaven. The most ubiquitous place that you'll see the hypercube is at every street intersection, the stop sign. People would say, can't be that simple. Occult symbols can't be all around the place like that. The stop sign is based on a two-dimensional projection of the hypercube. It is an octagon, and this is an archetype of a prison. The command stop is not just saying to the driver of the car as they approach an intersection. It is saying to anyone who looks at that sign. The stop sign is in red. Red is the colour of the base chakra, the colour of fear, of fight or flight response. It's a colour of danger. And this is immediately going to the subconscious mind. You're being told continuously to stop at every corner and every place you walk. It is saying stop to your forward progress, spiritual development, of your seeking. Stop what you are focusing on. Here is a quote from David Icke in his book The Biggest Secret, where he talks about symbolism of the hypercube. He says, the double square, one square on top of another, in any form is more secret society symbolism. In the secret language of symbolism, one square on top of another means control. Control of all that is right and all that is wrong. All that is just and all that is unjust. All that is positive and all that is negative. In other words, the double square means, quote, we control everything now. It means the dark occultists who control everything own you. They own your mind and your actions, lock, stock, and barrel. Symbolism as the hypercube is most often used in relationship to the police and military. The groups of people that the dark occultists refer to as our dogs. Every day, police and military follow orders of people who think of them as their pets, and they have no idea about this. To take one police department as an example, the Sussex Police Department logo is the double square, one square on top of another, rotated at 45, and on top of that, intertwined with it, is the Crown of Great Britain. They are not upholding people's rights, but the divine right to rule. This divine right to rule is a claim of the dark occultists. The royal families control the claim to own and rule people, and the police in every country uphold their bloodline. The police emblem shows two squares and an intersection of these two squares of the hypercube. The configuration in this logo of doves, 5 doves. In this image, it's used in conjunction with the British crown. You see an equal-armed cross at the top of the crown, along with the fleur de lis, the lily, the flower of the valley, the flower that represents the royal bloodlines from which the Crown of England claims its right to rule. The doves are in this configuration, 4 up and 1 down. There is an inverted pentagram on this symbol, and that represents duality. It represents matter raised above spirit and the Trinity put down. Also, the 4 doves, 1 up and down, represents the elements of earth, air, water, and fire of the physical realm. These 4 elements are raised above the 5th. The 5th element is spirit, and this element is buried. It is on the base floor. The symbol is placed on the forehead of police officers. The forehead is the place of the prefrontal cortex of the brain. This area is supposed to be the most rational area of the brain. It contains the highest brain functions. And this symbol of mind control is put right there on the third eye. The symbol of the third eye of the hypercube is shutting down the third eye. Another symbol that you will see everywhere in places of power is the checkerboard floor. This symbol represents base consciousness and the checkered life of a person who knows nothing of natural law. Dark occultists laugh at people who walk across the checkered floor and who know not what they do or the symbolism that it encompasses. A pawn is a person who is wandering on the floor of the house, but between light and dark, never knowing darkness from light. And a pawn, as such, can be controlled from a higher level, like a game of chess. The pawn can be moved by the chess master. Can be moved anywhere at a whim, because under mind control, the person doesn't know themselves. The chess master is at a higher level of awareness. They're looking down on the game of chess, on the floor of the board, looking down on the pawns. Whereas the people on the base of the floor can barely see 2 squares ahead of themselves. They can only see what's immediately around them. They have no idea of who's controlling them at a higher level. The checkerboard is a symbol for the floor of base consciousness, and this symbol is wrapped around the brain, wrapped around the Temple of Solomon. The human brain, the neocortex, has a left and right hemisphere. The hemispheres are the sun and the moon. The checkerboard is wrapped around the temple of man, the human brain. Then upon the frontal cortex, or the third eye, is placed a symbol of mind control. Now these are very specific occult symbols, and they're being used for a very specific purpose, which is about mind control. The hypercube is saying to a person, you're clueless. You're so dumb that we can put a symbol on your body that is mocking you. And it's doing that out in the open. These symbols are telling police and military that they are owned slaves. They are pawns and they are mind-controlled minions. So what course of action are we going to take? How are we going to correct this situation? We're going to correct this situation by breaking out of the prison, by raising our consciousness. But the word broken refers not only to fragmented consciousness of police, but is also used in respect to animals, like a horse who has been broken to obey the will of the owner. Police and military are broken people. Their will to resist is broken through fear and trauma, and they are manipulated through greed and fear. They obey unquestionably. Now these are not spiritually aware individuals, and this is what the symbol of their masters, why the symbol of their masters is placed on their head. Does this sound familiar to anyone? How about the prophecy in Revelation where it talks about the mark of the beast? So this mark is the mark of the dark occult, of mind control. These are beast people who are undeveloped in thought, emotion, and action. Now, American police also have a usage of this symbolism of the hypercube, and that is in the form of a black octagon that is placed on top of the crown chakra. The octagon or hypercube is a symbol of mind control and is placed at the highest point of energy, at the top of the head. The crown chakra represents unity consciousness and the coming together of the left and the right brain hemispheres. This is where the Kundalini energy rises up and eventually pours out to make a deeper connection with oneness, to the Creator, to the universe. But instead, it is being blocked at the highest point by the octagon. This is closed Stargate symbolism. The real Stargate is the third eye, and this opens to the crown chakra. But it is being blocked by this black door, this gate that is shut and sealed with the symbol of the octagon, the symbol of mind control. Let's look at Hypercube symbolism in the military. The dark occultists know exactly what they are doing. They are targeting people that know nothing of who they are and who owns them. Now, these people are not only ignorant in the military, but they have attached erroneous beliefs to the symbols. A double square in a commando unit, the second commando unit of the armed forces, is the double square, and it has a phallic symbol of a blade in the middle. The double square of the patch of the US Army Special Forces is an octagon, and these symbols appear repeatedly in the military. Now, the best example of a sigil is symbols and symbols placed one on top of another. This is the Military Medal of Valor. It is given ostensibly to people who show bravery above and beyond the call of duty. However, this symbol has many occult symbols buried within it. It has the inverted pentagram, and inside the inverted pentagram is the goddess of care, locked inside, imprisoned. Imprisoned inside the inverted pentagram, the symbol of Satanism. Now, the goddess has been called many names throughout time, including Isis, Mary, Diana, and Semiramis. The sacred feminine symbolically is a dove. It's a symbol of the sacred feminine and true care, and this is placed inside the inverted pentagram. The inverted pentagram has 4 points pointing upwards, representing air, earth, water, and fire. These are elements of the physical world. And then the fifth element, the element of spirit, is thrust into the ground. The spiritual nature of man has 2 upward points. The 2 points in the upward pointed pentagram representing the horns of the goat, representing duality, representing us versus them mentality, the divided consciousness, and these are raised above the 3, the Trinity. The Trinity is thought, emotion, and action, or in another symbolism, the Father, the Mother, and the Child. Now, above the medal is a ribbon, and we can see on this ribbon are 13 stars. They are in the configuration of a double square, one on top of another. And inside this octagon, it's forming the backing of the medal. The ribbon is folded into a pyramid with its capstone missing, which is a trapezoid. The trapezoid is another favourite symbol of Satanism. The inverted pentagram with the goat's head is one of the main symbols or emblems of Satanism. This is an archetypal form, and it is the form of the shape that represents the whole ideology of Satanism, and that is their way of being in the world, represented by the trapezoid. This symbol, this military medal of valor, is packed full of dark occult symbolism, and people have no idea. The cage fighting is a sport that is often fought within an octagon. This cage is representative of a prison where two prisoners are placed. Then they go to work on murdering each other, on hurting each other. Cage fighting is a sport that damages the prefrontal cortex, damages the human brain more than any other sport. Now, you must have a fully healthy working neocortex to ascend, to spiritually work on yourself. But people who participate in cage fighting clearly do not care too much about their brain. Getting in a cage and fighting another slave in a world is some sick notion of glory. And this is really just the out of control male ego. Now, Hypercube symbolism in the world of art. Salvador Dali's rendering of the Hypercube is in this crucifixion scene where Christ is crucified on the Hypercube cross. And this is another way of looking at the Hypercube, which is a cube that is extended into a higher dimension. It is 8 cubes arranged in a cross configuration. And you can see the checkerboard floor below the cross, which represents lower consciousness. You can see the way that consciousness is crucified through mind control. Christ consciousness is put to death through the Hypercube. The sacred feminine in this image, she's waiting at the base of the cross, waiting for the Christ consciousness to be restored, to be awakened, for resurrection to occur. In George Orwell's dystopian novel 94, you can see Big Brother inside the octagon. The octagon represents total control, the totalitarian society in George Orwell's dystopian novel 1984. So, who are these people? They have stolen our gold. They have it under lock and key at Fort Knox. Think about that from a symbolic perspective. The dark occultists have stolen all our alchemical gold, our real Mon-I, and the connection to higher self, which is the all-seeing eye within us. This is the only way that they can build their prison, their totalitarian prison state, with people who do not understand their connection to a higher self. They don't understand it because they are under mind control. All their alchemical gold, symbolically speaking, has been stolen. So thank you for watching this episode on the Hypercube. In the next episode, we'll be looking at chaos sorcery from the point of view of the occult sacrifice that we call 9/11.